Hey Mike, have you seen the stupid video Anthony Riley put out with Electric Boat in it?
Let me see that. What the fuck? Oh, hell no.
I have a few comments about Anthony Riley and his misconceptions about gravity and buoyancy. You know, I almost changed my mind about making a response video, but then Riley posted a video about density. Specifically that it's relative density and not buoyancy that makes a submarine float. That was a mistake.
And you go and you get a job at General Dynamics Boat Works in Connecticut. What do? They make submarines. You want submarines to both float and to sink. You know now that you have to design a submarine so it's less dense than water.
He tasks me. He tasks me, and I shall have him.
Oh yeah, it's go time. Let's talk about your video on why bowling balls float and how you've completely misrepresented what Dr. Russell Pinizzotto was talking about. He never said the term relative density. He never said there's no such thing as buoyancy. And the Wentworth Institute of Technology teaches buoyancy and gravity in all of its classes, just like every other university on the planet. Bowling balls are actually a great item to use as a demonstration of buoyancy. And make no mistake about it, it was a demonstration of buoyancy. Bowling balls are all the same diameter and have hugely different weights. You then go on to claim that bowling balls float solely due to relative density, implying that that's what the narrator was saying. Again, making the claim without providing evidence. You then make the same claim about submarines, even go so far as to say it's density, not buoyancy. Again, without any evidence to support such a claim. This is yet another in a long line of situations where you make the same relative density claims without providing a single shred of evidence to show that it's the most likely cause to the exclusion of all other possibilities. Yet another failure of you to properly use the scientific method. Do you hear me, Anthony Riley? You don't have the first clue how to use the scientific method. See, because here's the thing. Submarines float due to buoyancy and not just density. How do I know? Well, I am an engineer. And guess where I work? That's right, I'm a mechanical engineer at General Dynamics Electric Boat. We design and build submarines for the Navy, so your video tasks me. He tasks me. I can tell you beyond a shadow of a doubt that the standard buoyancy equations using acceleration due to gravity is how the naval architects determine whether a ship will float. This isn't a 50-gram egg we're talking about. This is a nuclear-powered warship with a submerged displacement exceeding 15,000 tons. If you don't get the calculations right, the thing ain't gonna float. Just ask the Spanish Navy. And yes, we can calculate everything associated with submarines. And with that segue, let's talk about your unsupported claims that math can't represent reality. And let's face it, they're just that, unsupported claims. You can't have negative stuff, huh? I'll ask anyone who's ever overdrawn their checking account whether it's possible to have negative stuff. Examples of negative ice creams prove absolutely nothing. The fact is, I can come up with literally dozens of such examples. Heck, there are whole books on math puzzles, tricks, and jokes that get all kinds of right and wrong answers because that's what they're specifically designed to do. Abbot and Costello's famous 7 times 13 is 28 comedy routine is a great example. If anybody who's never seen it, there'll be a link in the description because that's some funny shit. However, what you haven't shown and can never show is why examples like negative ice creams invalidate a given analytical solution for a given physical model, let alone invalidating all of mathematics. Saying negative ice creams invalidates mathematics as a representation of reality is like saying that since all crows are black and all crows are birds, then all birds must be black. It is yet another situation where you make a claim but completely fail to show any supporting evidence for that claim. It is merely that, a claim. Negative ice cream invalidates the use of math to represent reality, is a complete and total logical fallacy. However, here's an example that is evidence that math can and does represent reality. I've got a ramp at 45 degrees, taken it to my neighbor's yard, 150 feet from the center of my swimming pool. I've got a ball of a given size and weight. Using the standard ballistic trajectory equation, which has gravity in it, I can calculate the force needed to launch that ball from that ramp to land at the center of my swimming pool. I'll have to take into account things like the friction of the ramp, wind speed, and direction, but it's easy to do. And not only that, using the standard buoyancy equation, which has gravity in it, I can calculate whether or not that ball is going to float. And not only that, if it does float, I can tell you how much of it's got to be above the water line. I can calculate all of this using high school math and get correct, repeatable results every time. Another thing this example mathematically shows is that the vector of the force caused by the acceleration due to gravity is necessary, and more importantly, the only way to get the correct, verifiable, repeatable answer. Let me repeat that. It's the only way to get the correct, verifiable, repeatable answer and is direct evidence that math represents reality. Anyone driving a late model car? Then it's likely that some or all of that car was designed within a virtual reality environment. And not only that, but safety testing and component testing was likely done in this same said virtual environment. All of the analytical work done by computers, done mathematically. VR has enabled us to shorten the vehicle development process in many ways, Joe Guzman says. The thing is, they even use it for testing, crash testing. Can you imagine how much money you save by crash testing a car in a virtual environment before you have to go off and start crashing them in reality? Before you have to send that car off to be tested by the National Highway and Transportation Safety Administration, or whatever the European version of that is. Every program, vehicle, and platform utilizes VR at GM, according to Guzman. VR is being used by different groups on different days for decisions being made in the physical development process. It's a validation of what they are seeing in the physical world translated correctly from what they have done in math on a computer model. Situation where mathematics represents reality incredibly accurately, well enough to safely design cars that you're going to drive your family around in, and you probably are driving your family around in right now. ASME. Here's a bunch of papers on comparisons of analytical solutions, analytical testing, fundamental analysis testing of pipes and elbows and T's and other components within a piping system. And then comparing those results directly with real-world testing. It is so accurate that it better represents more it shows here that the piping components tested are shown to be simulated more accurately than previously published results. Using new procedure for obtaining stress strain curve for stainless steel using only values for Young's modulus, yield stress, and ultimate stress, and a representative stress strain curve from a test on a similar material specimen, the nonlinear responses of piping components tested are shown to be simulated more accurately than previously published results. This is a American Society of Mechanical Engineer, ASME, paper comparing nonlinear behavior of pipes and elbows in a finite element analysis environment and its correlation to actual test data of destructive testing of components. I can't show you the whole article because it is copyright, but you can go to the American Society of Mechanical Engineering website, asme.org, and you can download this paper if you would like. And this paper was published in 2002 in the Journal of Pressure Vessel Technology. And here's another paper. Same thing. Study of the effect of non-idealized crack in a 90-degree elbow using a finite element analysis. This paper was presented at the Pressure Vessels and Piping Conference last year, 2018. Again, it is a copyrighted paper, so you would have to download it from ASME yourself if you wish to read the whole thing. But as you can see, this is all the data you need to find the paper. And you probably could find subsequent studies. 100% I trust this math because it's what I do for a living. This is another situation where mathematics absolutely 100% accurately represents the actual real-world testing. I even did such testing myself where we did finite element analysis on elbows and then went into the lab and broke the things. Sure enough, the test results exactly matched our mathematical results. Math represents reality. No two ways about it. Also, I literally do math for a living. At Electric Boat, I do numeric modeling and stress analysis on fluid mechanical systems on board submarines. They call with a problem. The customer calls and I answer the call by evaluating analytically what the issue is, all with math. So, in my professional opinion, math does and can represent reality. Engineers and scientists do it every day. And you've been ignoring that particular point. That's why such things are a problem for you and why you so want to claim that math can't represent reality. You know it's impossible for you, or any flat earther for that matter, to come up with an analytical model that correctly represents a single FLIRF claim. However, the heliocentric analytical model correctly and repeatedly predicts literally everything we observe around us. So you and your FLIRFs friends have to find a way to make that all go away. That way you can avoid the huge gaping hole in your, well, for lack of a better word, model, because let's face it, it's not a model in any real scientific sense of the word. The big gaping hole is where you know you can't actually have any predictive model for any of your inane claims. Not one, ever. And that's the other thing. You've done nothing but make claims, which brings us to the biggest question that needs to be answered to support your relative density claims. Directionality. Why down? Why not horizontally? Why not up to the left at 36.97 degrees? In a recent video, you read the definition of vector, and then followed that up by stating that relative density causes the vector. Claiming it causes the downward vector is not evidence that it causes the downward vector. Hell, you haven't even shown any observations or calculations as evidence that relative density is the most likely cause of why things fall, to the exclusion of all other possibilities, let alone that it causes the downward vector. In other words, simply stating that relative density causes things to fall and is the cause of the downward vector is not evidence. It's just a claim. You've shown no causal relationship, and it's a clear example that you have completely ignored the scientific method that you claim to hold so dear. You are such a proponent of the scientific method, yet you completely fail in its application. Saying something like Baumgartner's jump is a demonstration of relative density is not evidence that relative density is the most likely cause of why things fall, nor that it somehow predicts his velocity profile. Saying that an egg is neutrally buoyant is proof of relative density is not evidence. It's, again, just a claim. You provided nothing to support it. As evidence, notice I said evidence and not proof, I could calculate where in a given column of brine, knowing things like temperature and densities, where that egg will be neutrally buoyant in that column, and that requires it taking into account the acceleration due to gravity. Could you make the same predictions using only relative density? And before you go off on the validity of analytical models, remember this: all birds are not actually black. Kind of begs a question, doesn't it? Is there a more scientific approach to relative density? Here, let me help you out with that. I'll try to explain to you how you need to start this process, because you don't have the first freaking clue how it works. That density tower you're so fond of, what makes a density tower work, I mean, besides gravity, is that it's made up of different mediums. The key is it's composed of mediums of different densities. Now, let's see what we know about the atmosphere. Nitrogen and oxygen comprise some 99% of air, and the remaining 1%-ish is made up of various gases. But here's the thing. The composition of those gases are consistent throughout the atmosphere, both horizontally and vertically. In other words, it's a single medium. Yet somehow, it exhibits a pressure gradient vertically through the atmosphere. And that pressure gradient is linear. So linear, in fact, that climatologists and meteorologists refer to altitudes by pressure, not by feet or kilometers. What about temperature? Altitude is not a predictor of temperature, nor is atmospheric pressure at a given altitude directly related to temperature, or is temperature even indicative of atmospheric pressure in any way, shape, or form. For instance, there's a town in Siberia called Verkhoyansk. Where's Yuri Alexei when you need him?
This place.
This place. At any rate, this town holds the world record for temperature swings of 188 degrees Fahrenheit, from coldest to hottest, and yet its atmospheric pressures remain constant and is consistent with everywhere else on the planet at about the same altitude. While temperatures drop through the troposphere, they begin to rise again to the stratosphere, as can be seen in this graphic from a link from Harvard University. The link will be in the description below. But it's clear that the linear nature of the pressure drop through the atmosphere has absolutely nothing to do with temperature. So what have we got? An atmospheric pressure that decreases linearly through the atmosphere with altitude, which is also not related to changes in temperature. An atmosphere that is composed of a single medium so that it can't stratify like we would see in a density tower. So one has to ask, what can cause a single medium to vary in pressure and density vertically, and is that cause related to the direction that things fall? In other words, is that cause the vector? causes gravity, by the way. In other words, so let's sum this up. Our atmosphere is a single medium. So the pressure gradient through our atmosphere doesn't vary vertically all by itself. There must logically be some external cause for that. And it's likely that that external cause, that external force due to the acceleration of gravity, is what also causes the downward vector. We know it's not a density tower phenomenon because it's all a single medium, and therefore it can't stratify on its own. We know it's not related to temperature because the pressure and density vary linearly through the atmosphere, where temperature varies wildly. There's another thing to consider. Regardless of what the relative density is to a given object falling through the atmosphere, that acceleration in the downward direction is a constant 9.8 meters per second squared, regardless of what the relative density is between the object and the atmosphere. So you see, Mr. Riley, you have to do a bit of critical, logical thinking before you can even attempt to postulate a hypothesis. To quote Sir Isaac Newton from Book 3 of the Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, which, by the way, is the basis for the current scientific method, and you probably have no clue how ironic that is. And no, it has nothing to do with gravity. So Newton said, "But hitherto I have not been able to discover the cause of those properties of gravity from phenomena, and I frame no hypotheses, for whatever is not deduced from phenomena is called a hypothesis. And hypotheses, whether metaphysical or physical, whether occult qualities or mechanical, have no place in experimental philosophy." In other words, since he didn't know the cause for gravity, he therefore couldn't postulate an explanation for that cause. And yet that's exactly what you're doing. You've proposed that it's relative density, yet you've never shown a single observation or evidence showing that it's the most likely cause to the exclusion of all others. All you've got are claims of relative density, claims of demonstrations of relative density, but zero observations of or evidence to support those claims. If I haven't already been clear on this point, claims that something is a demonstration of relative density is not evidence that the demonstration is actually caused by relative density. Do you understand that? Because all you do is make claims and provide no evidence in support of those claims. Do you get why that's not the way to do this? Do you get why that's not in accordance with the scientific method that you claim to hold in such high esteem and that the rest of us, people who do this for a living, don't? So, Mr. Riley, it's very clear that for you to show that relative density is actually a thing, you must at least consider the following. You need to show what causes atmospheric pressure to vary linearly in a vertical direction. Because we know it isn't temperature, and it certainly isn't a density tower because it's all a single medium. You have to show how relative density causes things to fall at a constant acceleration regardless of the changes in atmospheric density as the given object is falling through the atmosphere, including why that acceleration is the same in a vacuum chamber. You've got to show some observation or calculation as evidence showing that relative density is the most likely cause to the exclusion of all other probabilities for things falling, and why that relative density causes things to fall in a downward direction. You cannot presuppose that gravity doesn't exist. If you're going to say it doesn't exist, you have to show some evidence of why it has no effect on why things fall and why things are buoyant. You want anyone to take you seriously, then you have to use the scientific method correctly. Because as you can see, you haven't even gotten out of the first two steps of the scientific method, and you have not completed any sort of methodology that shows you to be correct. Just because you say an experiment demonstrates something doesn't mean squat without the evidence to back it up. I'm the engineer, and this has been a schooling of Sleeping Warrior.
What, you're still here? Well, for those who have been wondering why it's ironic that today's scientific method is based on Sir Isaac Newton's third book in the Mathematical Principles of Natural Philosophy, is that because most of that book is spent with proofs of gravity. In particular, it contains a lot of observations of celestial objects and planetary motions over time in order to be able to come up with an analytical solution as proof for gravity. That means that the independent variable was mostly time. It means that these observations are made of planetary motions of celestial objects that you cannot measure with a ruler. So the very scientific method that the flat earthers claim to be such a proponent of and claim to know more about than scientists, physicists, and engineers who actually do this for a living is based on the things that they say you cannot do. And with that, I'm the engineer, and I'm out.